back to all our club members, and a special welcome to all of our new club members. Thank you for signing on in our half club offer. We are, if you haven't already noticed, not in the office or in the warehouse. We are in Sydney today, where Megan is based, although the other end now.
Small mountains. This used to be my local hood. We're just off Tamarama Beach, which you can see behind us. The spectacular Bondi to Bronte walk is our home away from home today, which is where we have the very difficult task of telling you about these wines and tasting them for you.
Drinking champagne with a beautiful backdrop. So every month we like to focus in on a particular theme and try and enhance your learning with champagne, how it's made, what the techniques are, what the winemaker's doing in the winery. Our focus for today is about Solera. So looking at how the winemaker is treating those reserve wines. Classically, champagne is divided into two categories: a non-vintage, which is a blend of multiple years to help the house achieve consistency of style and quality, and a vintage, which is only made in a great year where they get enough sunshine. So Megan, this is a little technical for some, but can we define what Solera is and where it came from?
I think if we talk about reserve wines in general, that's probably a good place to start. Now, not normally, that's the wrong way to say it. I think majority of champagne houses will use what is called the perpetual reserve method. So they have a big giant tank. It might be wood, it might be stainless steel, but what they're going to do is when they're creating their non-vintage wine, and so the reason for this, and the reason for using reserve wines in any capacity, is for consistency. So when you pick up that bottle of non-vintage, you want to make sure that non-vintage, yellow label Clicquot, Moet, Brut Imperial, any of those wines that are, mass made basically, has to taste the same every single year. And in that regard, making a non-vintage wine is actually the hardest. If it's a great year and you're making a vintage wine, it's easy.
One set of grapes, 1 year.
The wine speaks for itself. You don't need to do all this complex blending to maintain that house style and that consistency. So within the reserve wines, each champagne house will do it slightly differently. So the reserve wine method is a perpetual reserve method is a giant tank. They'll take a little bit off the bottom to put into the current non-vintage one when they're making it, when they're blending it, and that will be determined, by taste with the winemaker, how much they need to use, how much will have to be back blended in to create that consistency year on year, and it will be determined both by the vintage they've just had and what the reserve wine is doing. So when they take a little bit of that reserve wine out and put it in the non-vintage wine for that particular year, then they'll top it up with the most recent vintage. So
it's like a master stock for all the chefs out there. It's continually
being topped up and
every
taken
year.
away.
But Solera classically, which is used by the Spanish for sherry, typically it was this sort of pyramid of barrels, and it would depend on the size of the vineyard as to how many barrels they had in the system. But the wine would go into the top barrel, which would be the newest wine, and every year they drain out the bottom level of barrel, and then they would keep moving the wine down the barrels. Every year the wine gaining more and more complexity due to time in barrel, time aging. And
so it's a method of fractional blending, whereas it's just, as Kyla said, master stock is the great example. This is fractional blending. So what you end up with, so the bottom layer is what is called the Solera. So that is the selection that then gets blended into that non-vintage. So what you're actually getting is the oldest part of your reserve wine. So it brings a lot more to it. So it's a much more complex, labor-intensive, and much more expensive method of doing your reserve wines. But the result of that is what you get is this beautiful, beautiful blend of really aged wine that then go into your non-vintage blend. So it gives consistency, depth, and just a lot more sort of oomph to the wine than maybe your perpetual reserve is going to give. And even within a perpetual reserve, yes, there can be a lot of older wines, but this is specially selecting only the oldest components of the reserve to then blend into the current vintage. So we have sent out a little diagram, I think.
Yes, we did. The diagram is out. We've got two champagnes that we're looking at.
Do a little demonstration later. May not make sense, but just to try and
give you a visual on it. But we've got two houses that we're featuring for this month. Denis Salomon. Megan and I were lucky enough to meet with Nicolas earlier in the year in his vineyard in the Valley de la Marne. We also are featuring another house from the Valley de la Marne, William Saintot. So they'll be our two champagnes for this month. Now, Denis Salomon is coming out to all of the lovers. It is a sensational champagne. It is the Histoire de Famille, is the wine that we've chosen, and being in the Vallée de la Marne, of course, we've got some fantastic Meunier plots. This particular champagne, that they love Meunier, and this is 100% Meunier, but using a Solera system. The other wine we have is William Saintot, also from the Vallée de la Marne. It is 75% Pinot Noir, 25% Chardonnay, also using the reserve system.
And they're both extra brut styles. That means it is below 5 grams a litre residual sugar. So they're dry styles.
Quite strong minerality, which is interesting, from fruit from the Vallée de la Marne and being 100% Meunier. Quite chalky characteristic. It's creamy. Saltiness to it.
The strong smell of salt coming off the ocean. So I actually think that's impacting our tasting, which is already, it's already a very dry style of wine. It's very minerally, but we're getting the additional salty kick from behind us. So this is using 25% Solera, which is quite a decent chunk of reserve wine. So you're getting wines as old as 2005 in this blend.
It has this really creamy characteristic. It's got this lovely soft French cream character to it.
Cream is exactly,
It's like milk.
yeah, like a...
Which is also interesting because the wine is holding back malo, so no malolactic fermentation. Sometimes you do get that really creamy note once the wine has gone through that conversion process from malic to lactic. Very low, 5 grams. Solera, going back to 05, so 15 years of Solera, and that's 25%.
Do you know, I think that's what's giving it that point of difference is you don't get a lot of reserve Meuniers, like they're not a long aging wine, so maybe using 25% of wines going back to, like you said, up to 15 years ago is what's giving it that creaminess, that complexity, and a bit more of that richness, and not that really upfront sort of aromatic floral hit.
And now that's a benefit too, because you've got a Solera that's doing the aging, but in actual fact this wine, once it's gone through secondary fermentation, has only spent 2 years aging in the cellar, so 2 years aging on lees. So not a super long time, but an amazingly rich and complex wine.
Yeah, and correct me if I'm wrong, he does a brut version as well? He does a version with a slightly high dosage? Or was that a different wine that I was thinking?
I think it might be... Yes, you're absolutely right. That's 5 grams.
Yes.
There is another version, but I also think he might release this as a sec.
Yes.
As a sweeter version altogether.
I think that's what we tasted. But I definitely liked this. I mean, I like dry styles of wine and less having a dessert. So it's definitely more to my palate, although it is tasting particularly dry. This morning, it is only 11 o'clock in the morning.
And by the way, that's the best time to be drinking champagne because your palate is the freshest, but you can see that instant well of saliva, the zippiness, the acidity, the directional acid line on the palate because you're abstaining from malo, holding malo back. So it does have a real linearity to it with that acid line, but the wine is very rich at the same time. It's got beautiful breadth on the palate. Different composition of grapes, even though it's a similar area in terms of its profile in Champagne. So 75% Pinot Noir, 25% Chardonnay, also using a Solera system, and this also looks like it's been aged under cork as well, with this unique square neck.
Yep, you can see here.
I'm loving the bottles of both houses actually. If you look at the full range, both of their bottles are quite unique and very different in their artwork, in their shape, in what the family are doing. Both houses are artisanal producers. Another drop spilt. William Saintot.
Both started in Champagne in the mid-war period.
1900. Yep,
either just before first or between the wars. They've both been there since the beginning of the 19th century.
Yep.
19th
century?
20th.
1900s.
1900s.
That's
It is
okay.
early morning.
It is early morning. So this is the Prestige Extra Brut. There's 3 grams in this wine, so slightly less sugar than the previous wine. This is coming out to all of our connoisseurs. Look at the depth of colour.
I get this immediate like honey toffee. Ooh. Rich.
Wow.
Ew, this is
Beautiful wine.
This is a powerhouse. This is
Gorgeous wine.
Oh, so this is the first time we've
had this too. We're tasting it with you.
We didn't get to visit everyone. We tried to visit our new club partners while we were there. We didn't get to visit everyone. We didn't get to visit William Saintot. And this is the first time we're trying it. The shipment arrived last week, so
fantastic
fresh
wine.
off the boat.
It does have a real richness to it, a real vinosity. It's quite exciting, and this is the whole point of the club. You know, we hunt high and low to bring champagnes that have never been in Australia before. You are the first people to have it in Australia. It's a fantastic wine. We're not just looking for great wineries, we're looking for particular cuvées within their selection that work within our theme. This is the Extra Brut Premier Cru. 75% Pinot Noir, 25% Chardonnay from Grand Cru sites. The Solera system is being utilised again in this wine, and this is what they're calling the wine, you know, the spirit of Solera. The Solera is dating back to 2010, so you've got a little bit more time with the 05 from Denis Salmon, but you've got 2010 here. 30% of that being blended into the mix. Primary fermentation, you've got most of the wine being fermented for the first time in barrel,
which you can definitely
the richness
brings this richness. It is the first like incredible aromas I got off this were this like toast and honey and just
caramel, vanilla,
so much caramel, so much vanilla, but not overwhelming. It's very well balanced. Like once you taste the wine, it is still fresh on the palate. You're getting, you know, it is extra brut style, so you're not getting a lot of, you know, sweetness on there, but it is.
The acid profile is very different in both
Mm.
wines, which is interesting. It's really rich. It's quite vinous. It's very powerful. The aromatic compounds are just bursting out of the glass. It's a super rich wine. It doesn't feel as zippy as acidic, which is interesting because they also hold back malolactic fermentation in this wine. So it's got a bit more roundness, different profile on the palate to the previous wine. 3 grams of sugar, which is honestly, as an extra brut, not perceivable. I mean, you really cannot tell that this is an extra brut wine. It is perfectly balanced. The winemaker has made the right choice in his dosage addition, or her dosage addition, but I think it's a him in this case.
It is a him, I think, yes.
But sensational wine. I think there's a real power to it.
I'm so impressed. This beautiful, full palate feeling from that Pinot Noir, from that reserve wine. I think this is an absolutely incredible wine. They're both incredible wines in very different sort of ways, but this is very much, I would pair this with food. This is not an aperitif. I mean, it could be. Everything's an aperitif if you want it to be. This is very much a gourmet wine, a gourmand wine. I would, you know, look, it would.
My head's already going to food. I mean, you could do a truffle pasta.
That's what I'm thinking. Stinky cheeses, truffle pasta.
You could do a veal. You could do a côtelette. I mean, it's because you've got so much volume, you've got so much power. You really do have so much potential for pairing, and it's got a real breadth to it. It's got a real level of oomph. You'd really get away with quite a few dishes.
Yeah.
But beautiful wines, but both wines showing us what Solera can add to the wine, which is real depth, power, adding in some aging capacity without the need for the champagne to be put in the cellar for a really long period of time post secondary fermentation. And that is our theme for this month. We hope you enjoyed both of the wines. We've got a new container that's just landed from France with a whole raft of fascinating champagnes that have never been in Australia before. So stay tuned. We've got some exceptional champagnes on their way.
I would also just like to ask, as a finale, with this new shipment that we've brought in, I would love to hear a bit more feedback from you guys. I would love to know, what wines are you loving? Like, if there's something special in what we bring out in the club wines, you know, if people want the wines, we can eventually stock them. So I'd love to know, over these next few months, as you experience these new wines that we've brought in, tell us what you love, what you're not loving, what styles resonate with you, what you would buy a case of, because it'd be really good for us to know where you're at and what you're enjoying. Because as much as these guys are wonderful to try for club, if we, for me, spot a winner, such as this.
Gorgeous,
I think I would want more of this.
You might see more of this on
Yeah, you might see more of this. Yeah, because we're not restricted, because that's the beauty and the freedom that we have. Like, we're not restricted. We don't have to bring in the whole range. We don't have to represent everything. We can bring in these individual wines. So
and there are 3,000 champagne houses, and we're slowly exploring them all.
And you need to help us. So
Enjoy.